Hey everybody, it's Patrick Lovell coming at you on Thursday, January 26, 2023 at approximately 5:15 p.m. my time. And this working title may have just transitioned from just a thought that I had yesterday as I espoused it from the truth bombs that we do here, Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con, to the what the fuck files, because that's what this is in so much that every day the information everywhere comes in fast and furious, and still everybody is in the dark. I mean, I can't believe what I see every day on Twitter, where there's, spend 5 minutes rummaging around and you'll see the most twisted, diabolical machine of misinformation and disinformation, with every once in a while something coming through that's like interesting or having some tone of truth or realism to it. But it's just so lost in this feeding frenzy of hate and pointing the finger at everybody else and misinformation. And some people that capture my attention, like, for example, this woman, Mayo Spicy, if she's real, and I think she might be. She has thousands and thousands of followers, but I mean, she basically has Tourette syndrome when it comes to the Republicans, and I love to follow her. But what she's talking about is somewhat one-dimensional and just hyper-focused on, the ridiculous actors in the Republican Party, particularly Marjorie Taylor Greene, and of course the likes of, oh God, well, I mean, she's relentless as it relates to Trump. I was thinking of Jim Jordan from Ohio, of course, and that's her focus. And I think a lot of people, both on the right and the left, tend to hyper focus. I mean, she's extremely effective at just embarrassing and humiliating and going for the jugular of these guys, but she has no awareness of what it is that I'm revealing to you. And I dropped on her line today. I said, look, if you don't understand what Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was, and what was used for and how it was in 2009, then you don't understand the world you're living in. And I've been plastering that all over the place, particularly on YouTube, for some time, but that's where I come from. And I've told everybody on Twitter who will follow and pay attention that if somebody's not telling you that Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was used illegally to backdoor trillions of dollars to a bankrupted, racketeering, insane, corrupt financial system, and you don't understand who did what, when, and how, and for what, and what that means, and what the media did, and everything else, then you don't understand the world you live in. And that's what I've been revealing to the world nonstop. But I'm going to backtrack for today's what the fuck file, and I'm going to try to, marry something that happened to me last night, which I found incredibly revealing, refreshing, at the same time incredibly frustrating on so many levels. But I was looking through my YouTube feed, and lo and behold, Inside Job pops up, a free screening, right? I'd never seen Inside Job free. In fact, recently it was interesting that Panic, the Vice propaganda documentary that was absolutely a smoke and mirrors, hide the flag to the American people by none other than everybody's favorite. I don't even want to go there in terms of what I think I know about this guy, Shane Smith, who was the CEO of Vice Media, basically set up a complete propaganda job with HBO and did, just the most insanely deceptive revelation of what the 2008 financial crisis was in a whitewash in a documentary called Panic. But I always recalled, and was a big part of my life for a long time, but I haven't seen it for a long time, and it was refreshing to see it pop on my timeline. But it was, the 2011 Academy Award winning documentary, directed and produced by a phenomenal talent, a gentleman by the name of Charles Ferguson, who it had starred and narrated Matt Damon in a documentary called Inside Job. And so I watched it again, and I think I've probably seen it 20 times throughout the years. But I remember the first time I watched this film, and I was fresh to the whole thing in terms of orienting my mind and understanding how things were working and power and everything else in the United States, having to kind of configure everything that I've learned, for the previous 30, 40 years, quite frankly. 40 years, because I had just turned 40 when the 2008 great financial crisis buried me alongside millions of others and turned my life upside down and inside out. And that's what led me on the journey that I did. And it started, quite frankly, with watching Inside Job. And I remember, the first time I watched it, I couldn't fully comprehend it. I thought I was a smart guy. I thought I understood things, but financialization and the different processes involved, it was like a reflection of a world that I didn't know existed. It was almost like putting my head underneath the engine of a very complex engine, that I was like learning the reading manual and trying to understand how all of the pieces worked, right? It was a little overwhelming, but I remember the tone of it just suggested to me that it was an inside game of theft and deception played by the players that had the control. And that's exactly what it was. It took me years and years to fully understand and extrapolate all of the elements that were presented in that film. And many of them, I'll be the first one to admit it when I look back at it. I mean, we basically mirrored, I think is probably the right terminology, a lot of the revelations, but to kind of a next level in terms of the educational apparatus. We used, a lot of graphics and things to be able to discover, the continuity of complex financial structures that reveal exactly how these situations worked. And of course, that's in our work at www.thecon.tv. But, on the one hand, looking back at it, I mean, in some ways, I'm like, my God, it was like Ferguson dropped the mic. Like there was nothing else that really needed to be done. If you understood all of the parameters of what that film did, which obviously, I bet if we put it in front of like even today in 2023, 1 out of 20 people would fully digest it and understand what the hell they're talking about. Maybe 2 or 3 would come away with understanding who created the problem and why. And I think the rest of the population would still be somewhat befuddled about exactly who was to blame and why, even though it's absolutely obvious in that film. But there was a lot of information. And maybe the same could be said for the con. I don't think so. I think we unpack it in a way that we spoon feed the audience in a way that A plus B equals C. It's pretty easy. I always say it's not rocket science, it's racketeering. But ultimately, the biggest thing that we do in the con that Ferguson couldn't do, and interestingly enough, I think he did do in a way, because I didn't read what I think was his masterpiece, which was called Predation Nation. Or maybe it was Predator Nation. I apologize if I butchered the name of it, but I don't think that came around until 2015. Or maybe it was released in 2012, but I don't think I read it until 2015 or maybe even 2016 for that matter. But it was revealing a lot of the stuff that I was discovering as we were making the con. And I was like, oh my God, he told the story. But as I recall, he wasn't, really a guest like on, for example, any late night show discussing the details of what he was revealing. Or guests, or featured by the New York Times and so on and so forth. And I remember cross-pollinating searches to see everywhere that he was being interviewed for this subject, and it was subdued, to be quite honest with you. And that should have been my first lesson, that this was just a waste of time to be able to break through the Borg, to be able to tell the story, because there he was, Charles Ferguson, telling most of what it is that I was realizing. But again, we went much further and we got a lot more information even than Charles Ferguson did, which is, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. All respect to Charles Ferguson, but we actually did. And we did because I just happened to tie into all of the top guys in law enforcement from the FBI and the Department of Justice and the SEC that gave us that side that nobody else did. Not to mention we went to the top guys in the C-suites that were the whistleblowers that had all of the information, and we corroborated it from the ground level upwards. Not to mention we found the only RICO the only RICO conviction in the entire country for this mammoth fraud that destroyed 50 million people and led to tens of trillions of dollars, which is Federal Reserve Act 13.3. So for example, like today I was on Twitter and I'm like looking at all of these different, entries. And if you spend 10 minutes on Twitter, it's enough to scramble your brain for a week. I mean, there's so much misinformation, disinformation, and hatred, and people puking their guts out about different things in, less than 180 characters. And it's just fucking ridiculous, to be honest with you. But some people do things really effectively and smart and, incredibly, effective, at least for me. Everybody has their own taste. But for example, there's this one woman, I believe she's out of California. She goes by, the Twitter handle Mayo Spicy. And she's like almost got Tourette syndrome when it comes to the Republican Party and the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene or Jim Jordan and, all of the others in the Republican Party, and just most importantly, Donald Trump, and she says like these 2-line, like just roundhouse kick to the face, uppercut, sandwich to the balls sort of, motifs on these assholes, and that's what they are. They're assholes. I'm sorry. Every single one of these guys, just belligerent people that I'm disgusted that they're in government, you know. And that's not to say the Democrats don't have their fair share of nauseating people that operate in a way that is antithetical to what we think is a democracy. And of course, they're all getting played, and they're playing us, and they're all paid for by the system and the machine and the Borg that I'm revealing to you. But to try to kind of blend these things and what I'm talking about in a way that's effective, I'm going to try to kind of I'll just say it. I mean, it's shocking to me, right, that Matt Damon, for example, given what he did and what he had access to in this glorious documentary film, which I encourage you to watch if you've never seen it. It's free on YouTube now, Inside Job. This glorious documentary with some of the greatest information that's ever been done on the subject. And that guy becomes the global spokesperson, to be bold, for crypto. And now we're seeing crypto unwind and shatter and be revealed for what it is. And I always kind of had my ideas about it. I'm learning more every day. But I mean, for the most part, it looks like it's a tool or some sort of facade for a lot of illegal money laundering and illegal activity and so on and so forth. I mean, just yesterday, it was the Department of Justice did this really quite amazing revelation of how they busted this Russian guy whose name eludes me at the moment, but the company, it's called Bitslotto, and it was like a $700 million racket, for money laundering, among other things, this crypto exchange. And so, the Department of Justice revealed, what kind of reach that they have and how sophisticated they are and how smart they are, quite frankly, at being able to railroad financial crime when they decide to do it. I mean, it was impressive, but it almost beleaguers more questions than answers, given what I know they haven't done. And for example, I had mentioned this in yesterday's What the Fuck file, that JP Morgan got stiffed or clowned, if you will, in a $175 million fraud scheme that was perpetuated by a woman by the name of Charlie Javis, which I had said in my yesterday's What the Fuck files was really kind of a reflection of what Wells Fargo has been doing for years and getting away with for years. But I'm sure the consequences for Miss Jarvis, who was a Wharton grad, smart person, but kind of in the same vein of Elizabeth Theranos in terms of developing a company that was a lie, and she paid computer scientists to make up a whole bunch of accounts that she sold, based on student loan evolution and machinations to J.P. Morgan Chase. That was part of a larger, broader scheme of J.P. Morgan Chase to get more clients in their sort of assembly line, if you will, as clients. It makes sense, that they might be invested in what she did, but the bottom line is that it was all built on fake accounts, of which Wells Fargo got nailed again 3 weeks ago for $3.9 billion, which constituted stealing houses and cars from people illegally, and they do it all the time. Okay, I'll bring that full circle. When I was watching Inside Job, the amount of information that Charles Ferguson packed into a 90-minute documentary, particularly as it related to Alan Greenspan, was magnificent. Now, as a matter of fact, and I think I touched upon this a minute ago, but Charles Ferguson wrote a book called Predation Nation or Predator Nation a couple of years later after Inside Job that didn't get a lot of play. The only time I remember actually seeing an interview with Charles Ferguson discussing Predatory Nation or Predation Nation, and I might have this mixed up because it was a long time ago in terms of what interviews he actually did, but it seems like he was limited to being able to get the story out there. One of the interview scenarios that took shape that I thought was astounding was Charles Ferguson was on Morning Joe, and it was co-hosted by Andrea Mitchell, which was awkward to say the least because Andrea Mitchell is married to former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan. And it wasn't until I rewatched Inside Job last night that I remembered that Charles Ferguson had touched upon what it is that I talk about frequently all the time, which is probably the most illuminating and important information of this entire calamity that I've been trying to reveal to you over and over and over. But Alan Greenspan was warned of predatory behavior that he was mandated by Congress to regulate through the Homeowner Equity Protection Act, in which he completely ignored it. Now, in Charles Ferguson's documentary Inside Job, it's pretty damning testimony, but he doesn't go as far as what I've done because of people that I've interviewed and elicited information based on the work that we've done for the con. That includes Kathleen Engel, who revealed to us that through the research that they revealed to us, which is incredible intent and a scheme for brokers in different cities around the country to highly target African American widows, particularly through a technique that you could get information in the registry of deeds to find out who had equity in their house and who needed loans because the cities were targeting them for actual renovations that they would get fined. And then lo and behold, here comes a broker knocking on their door offering them a predatory loan. All of that spelled out in the con, but in context to this point that I'm trying to make about Charles Ferguson and Inside Job, is he gloriously makes that point in Inside Job. Not quite as down the path as we do and what I've been doing, but enough to where it should have at that time generated like a nuclear reaction from not just the government, but the American people to be like, what did he just say? Because ultimately, that's the revelation of Federal Reserve Act 13.3. And I'll come back to in a minute. But, I remember seeing this interview with Charles Ferguson on Morning Joe with Andrea Mitchell. And Andrea Mitchell was relatively silent. And at one point, they addressed the fact that he brings up Greenspan. And you can see in this interview where it's just like, how dare you, sort of attitude from Andrea Mitchell. How dare you, impugn the integrity and character of my husband, who is obviously one of the most important people in the hierarchy of American power, probably the most powerful person really on the planet, as indicated by what it is that I'm about to reveal to you, and I have been. But I just remember staring at that, knowing what I knew, but now thinking about it in retrospect, having to revisit it and knowing all of the information that I know, that first of all, Andrea Mitchell, again, is in the catbird seat, is a journalist that we're supposed to literally buy as some sort of professional with integrity, that we're going to listen to information that, she's gleaning on the people. She's had her show on MSNBC for years, and yet she's married to a guy who literally is responsible for burying tens of millions of people because of the action he didn't take when he had the information, because of all of the stuff that we lay out. And I don't want to spend hours and hours explaining to you exactly what I know about the process at the Federal Reserve and so forth. But it's just another sort of like, it's 2023 now, okay? And what have we seen in the last couple of weeks, right? Well, for one, this woman, like I said, Charlie Javis, who pulled one on JP Morgan Chase, she was a darling in the business media. Again, just like Elizabeth Theranos. Oh my God, here's a woman out of Ivy League. She's an innovator. She's doing something new. She's at the top. They're trading and pumping and dumping and all of these types of things that would drive the stock value and everything else. And it turns out it's a fraud. Same thing with Sam Bankman-Fried, right? I mean, everywhere Sam Bankman-Fried is gone for the last several years, this guy's had the red carpet rolled out for him, giving especially on CNBC and the likes of. I can't stand him. And if you paid attention to what I've said over and over and over, I mean, the biggest mouthpiece, freaking blowhard, manipulation tactic, if you will, for Wall Street is Andrew Ross Sorkin of the New York Times and Dealbook and CNBC. I mean, it's just like this guy covered for what it is that I continue to reveal to you, and nobody's the wiser. You go to Twitter and it's like everybody's battling over everything that's happening in the day. Or if you're, for example, I mean, it drives me absolutely nuts to see somebody like Nina Turner who has, these tweets that are like, oh my God, the system is so corrupt. Oh my God, the people are being, screwed over. And, she has no idea how the system works. She just basically spews out information that has no backing. It's like somebody sabotaged her brakes and she got into a car accident and she goes to the mechanic and she doesn't want to listen to the mechanic tell her how her brakes were sabotaged and who did it and how and what, and try to figure it out so she can remedy the problem. That's not her thing. It's just like somebody sabotaged the brakes. Oh, poor me. What? I mean, that's kind of what this country does over and over and over. And that's what these hyenas of finance and misinformation and those paying the bills and the oligarchs and everybody else, get away with this shit. And, meanwhile, to take the step, the point further in terms of inside job, I mean, it just basically showed that everybody through the revolving door in academia and government had conflicts of interest, and corporations, as well as, in obviously the regulatory body. And everybody was just fucking taking, money in the back alley. I frequently, say that we've become a nation of pimps, hoes, and junkies. And I'm talking about the elites. It's not funny. It's absolutely masterful deception by fucking assholes, and nobody can actually penetrate the bubble to see the emperor's new clothes. And that's what I bring to you over and over and over. And ultimately, the last piece of the puzzle today, at least, I mean, there was this New York Times article based on an anonymous source that William Barr, former Attorney General of the United States, William Barr under Trump, who's gone out to promote his new book. I just happened to see him on Bill Maher last week, and Bill Maher didn't ask these questions that are I'm about to reveal to you. But ultimately, Bill Barr was working with a prosecutor in the DOJ by the name of John Durham, where they set out to basically quash any connection between Trump and Russia. Now, you might be aware that everybody went nuts on Twitter because of the Twitter files and the FBI's supposed involvement with, censoring and suborning information from the right. And of course, Trump is like the victim of all of that. That's what drives, the right sort of, I don't know, what would we call it? It's almost like hysteria. I mean, it's just like people are like, oh my God, there's proof, there's evidence. And you see this like wishy-washy flip-flopping shit from like Tucker Carlson and like, the CIA killed Kennedy and all of these other things where, I mean, there's a hodgepodge of just like people switching and polarizing and using manipulative tactics to jump on everyday different scenarios to like ride the freaking 24-hour fool circus, right? Tools in the fool circus, but at the same time, not getting to, really the gist of it. And, when I saw this article and I read this article today about this anonymous source that ultimately reveals that William Barr and this guy, John Durham, went to go, suppress any connection between Trump and Russia, but ultimately opened up a criminal investigation into the financial ties between Trump and Russia. And then that was ultimately suppressed. Anybody who's been following anything about Trump for a long time, particularly Mayo Spicy on Twitter, she's been saying this a lot recently, that Trump's been an asset bitch for, the Russians since the 80s. Probably true. He's probably been laundering money, the whole time since then. But, more recently, and I did an interview and I just posted this on Twitter today, with David Enrich from the New York Times, who's the guy who actually wrote the book on Donald Trump's relationship with Deutsche Bank, which was connected to Trump, of course. And so all of this hysteria about Russiagate and the suppression of the Steele files and the Clintons being involved and everything else, it doesn't whitewash anything to do with Trump being involved directly vis-a-vis Deutsche Bank, who, admitted, I think, several years ago to a massive fraudulent, money laundering enterprise with the Russians in the West for something like multiple billions of dollars. Okay? So let's think about this in context. So in this article, for example, regarding, Charlie Javis, basically pulling one over on Chase. There's no mention of Chase actually being a 5-time recidivist in the last 7 years, including everything from LIBOR to what they were involved with the 2008 financial crisis, to a lot of the account scamming, and then of course the RICO conviction based on metals insider information. Okay, but beyond that, Chase had been involved very deeply, as has been revealed recently, in two really like what the fuck scenarios, which were Bernie Madoff. They were a huge situation in terms of knowing what Bernie Madoff was involved with, that they were hands off about, and obviously never indicted and regarding Bernie's Ponzi scheme that included Chase, and then ultimately Epstein. Okay, now those are kind of like the surface, like what the fucks, right? But ultimately, the FinCEN files from the ICIJ revealed a few years ago that literally trillions of dollars have been laundered from around the world from all sorts of incredible sources through our financial system. And my theory is, quite frankly, a lot of that is to suffice the Dodd-Frank buffer requirements, and the banks in the United States will take it anywhere they can get it. The level of fraud is insane. The 2011 mammoth documentary film by Charles Ferguson with Matt Damon narrating, revealed unbelievable amounts of important information that should have turned this fraud inside out and upside down. Instead, he gets the Academy Award. They quash Predator Nation. I haven't heard much from Charles Ferguson since. Then what Charles Ferguson wasn't able to reveal, and of course what I've talked to you guys about in the past, what Vice Media hid in their documentary, as did Frontline, as it relates to the Federal Reserve, is what I continue to tell you. Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was used illegally to backdoor $29 trillion to the bankrupted financial system whose collateral was worth nothing, specifically because of collateralized debt obligations and all of the runs that preceded it. This is The Big Short. These are all the things that created the meltdown to begin with, that everybody took years and years and years to unpack. By the time we get to 2014, 16, we have these huge settlements. They have the statement of facts. The Department of Justice reveals that everybody in the pipeline at these banks were involved with fraud, but they don't bring criminal charges. They basically put it on the sidelines and say, hey, eventually we can bring criminal charges if we so choose. Of course, that didn't happen. We end up with Trump as a president. He ends up with William Barr. He's covering up the relationship as the Attorney General of the United States between Trump and Putin and Deutsche Bank, among other things. And that just was proved today. And, then ultimately, or not proved, it was just illuminated, within all of this other construct of like who's got the, national security clearance and the files and, classified documents, President Biden, Vice President Pence, of course, everything in Mar-a-Lago. It's a complete fucking shit show. It's a complete train wreck. And nobody, when they're doing this back and forth, tools in the full circus sort of situation, is they probably have never even seen Inside Job, let alone The Con. And the whole thing's been suppressed. And ultimately, what we reveal to you are the masters of this game. So ultimately, this woman goes down for her fake accounts against, Jamie Dimon, but then all of these other things that I brought doesn't get elevated based on what Jamie Dimon's been involved with for the last, quite frankly, going on 24 years, I think, going back to Baltimore when he was working with, Sidney, oh God, what is his name? The former CEO of Citigroup that brought it all under one roof after the Graham Leach-Bliley bill that he was involved with that got rid of Glass-Steagall and everything else. Sandy Weil is who I'm trying to think of. Anyway, there's a lot of information packed in here. There's so much more that I could reveal that I will continue to reveal. I hope you stay tuned. I hope you share this. I've got the answers that reveal how this entire criminal system works. And what does it reveal? Well, it reveals that we've showered trillions upon trillions of dollars upon criminals that came out of our best universities that just became induced in control fraud. They're sociopaths. They're criminals. This is the mob. But yet they have credibility. And we, as a people, can't keep up with the information and the misinformation, the disinformation, because of the lies through media that I've indicated, and showed you tonight, going all the way back to Andrea Mitchell. It goes way beyond that. I mean, of course, many of you know that, all of the WMD stuff after 9/11 and the Bush administration in Iraq. I mean, that's another aspect of this. We've been in a complete disaster downward spiral for 20 plus years. We're smarter than this. I'll say this every single time I do these, and I apologize if I don't have the lights on and I look like I'm some sort of strange character because I'm not looking in at the video to see what it is that I'm saying. But we're the United States of America. We're a country predicated on law where no man or woman or company is above the law, except that it is. We're the country that went to the moon, that built the Saturn V NASA project. We've done so many beyond comprehension, extraordinarily mighty ventures that require just the most technical know-how and genius and brilliance at every single level. There is no way we can allow this to be what we are. I am begging you, follow me, share me, join me, donate to what we're doing. Be a part of a movement to purge corruption. It will destroy us. It has been destroying us. It's been running loose for decades and decades. It is the largest national security threat to the United States, but I dare say it's the most beguiling terrorism on earth. I mean, I don't want to compare apples to apples. Do I think that Al Qaeda and ISIS and the rest, are am I comparing them to that? No, it's a different type of long-term destruction. Those bastards and those entities are typically getting paid by the system that feeds off of what it is that I'm telling you. Oh my God. I just hope this stuff makes sense. I hope it's coming together for you in some way. Please watch the con. Watch www.thecon.tv. Check out the truth bombs, and study this stuff. Check out 11122 on Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs The Con, and then also, please check out the new Untouchables with real progressives that you can also find just doing a search. Thank you for listening. All the best. Take care, and until next time, be well.